So DeepSeek just dropped a free coding agent harness a few days ago, and it's already sitting past 140,000 GitHub stars, probably more by the time you see this. And for context, that completely shattered OpenClaude's record for the fastest star growth and trending velocity in GitHub history. So let's see what this hype is all about. So a quick look at what we're working with. Everything here, what they're advertising essentially is that the model, the tools, the interface, everything is technically a plugin. So it's very modular and more transparent than other closed source harnesses like Cloud Code or Codex, and we'll take a closer look at this in a second and even try it out to see its benefits. Also, because I know it can get confusing with harness, very simply defined, agent equals model plus harness. So basically, if you're not the model, you're the harness. A harness is every piece of code, configuration, or logic that isn't the model itself. So a raw model is not an agent, but it becomes one when a harness gives it things like state, tool execution, feedback loops, and enforceable constraints, etc. So it can include things like, the system prompt, tools, skills, MCPs, bundled infrastructure, like, when it has a sandbox, a file system, a browser, orchestration logic, so it can spawn sub-agents or handoffs, maybe even model routing, and the list can go on. So all that encompasses the harness. All right, so let's see how easy it is to get started. This is in developer preview, which simply means that they're rapidly iterating. So instead of installing the npm package, let me run it from the source. So here I just copied the commands they had in the README, essentially to clone it, go into that directory, and then install and build it, and then run the web app. All right, so we see now that the web app is running on port 3080. So we can simply open this up. So now that we are here, it's running on the localhost port 3080. It kind of looks like your standard chatbot if you're, used to ChatGPT or Anthropic, etc. The difference here is in the settings. As you can see here, we'll go through some of this, but let's start off with models. You can, of course, get your API key from DeepSeek and insert it here. What I did instead is to have completely zero costs. You can run it with like Ollama open source models that can run on your laptop. So here, for example, the settings that I used is the display name is not important, right? We don't have an API key. You just have to put the base URL, which is your Ollama running probably at another port, typically 11434/v1. You can put the API protocol to OpenAI completions. And I, for example, have two models installed. So GPT OSS 20 billion and the new Qwen 3.8 27 billion. The MLX is simply because I'm on Mac, and so it's a bit more efficient. And if you download more models, you can click this fetch available models, and it will list maybe a third model that you, for example, download in the future. So that's quite handy. And then once you click apply, we can test this, right? I think in the beginning it might take a bit longer. Okay, as you can see, took like 2 minutes to say, hey, back to me, but that's just because of cold start, right? And the nice thing is here you can see like the time to first token, how many tokens per second, your throughput, which is quite nice. You can see also the reasoning trace of the model, also some context injection. And the really nice part is this trajectory tab here in the top left, where you can also clearly highlight which sections you want to look at. And for example, even look at the initial system prompt. So what they initially have as the default system prompt, what tools it has access to, entering bash scripts and commands. And yeah, this is honestly really nice. It's much more transparent than other harnesses out there, especially like the closed source ones. You can look at duration, how many turns in case it was a multi-turn conversation. So honestly, not something like super novel, just a little bit more transparent, which people are happy about. So you might be thinking, okay, yeah, cool. DeepSeek went from like a model provider to a product with this harness. So what? It's just like Anthropic and OpenAI with Cloud Code and Codex. So that's a very fair question. Honestly, the cool thing is how configurable and transparent it is. They keep talking about plugins. If you go to their website, actually typed in DeepSeek Harness here, that's kind of their main motto, saying that everything is a plugin. So yeah, let's test this live perhaps. I see, let's create a new session. And instead of the standard mode, they have different modes. This is what we just tried out, like a full coding agent with file editing, etc. You know, even the web search, actually, if you go to the settings here under plugins, you can see, for example, web search. You can use any web search you like. So whether it's, you know, like Tavily or Bing or Brave, you know, you can configure this. You know, you can also configure the agent loop, how many parallel tool calls you allow and stuff of that sort. Also, there's so many different plugins you can go through here that are either enabled or you can disable. So you can really do a lot of different things. But what's really nice is this creator mode. So this one is to create all these kind of presets and plugins. And so one thing that we can try out, instead of like a toy example, if you have looked into productivity or time management or time boxing, definitely came across Pomodoro. And so instead of going on a website to time your Pomodoro, you can just create it right here so you don't doom scroll Instagram while you wait for your agent. So let's test it out. And if you're not familiar with Pomodoro, it's essentially kind of like a timer where you typically work for 25 minutes and then you separate into short breaks. Let me see if there's a good image here. So yeah, you work for 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, and yeah, you're not supposed to sneak work in those 5 minutes. And then after like 4 Pomodoro sessions, you have a longer break. So this is just a way to like time box yourself and be a bit more effective with your time. It works for some people, it doesn't for others, but if you haven't heard of it, definitely give it a try. But yeah, right here, just because I'm lazy, let's do it with voice mode. So I selected the creator mode. Could you build me a Pomodoro timer here in this interface as a plugin so that I can effectively work and not run into AI psychosis and time box myself better? All right, so yeah, let's kick this off. Essentially, the idea would be that, you know, somewhere in this interface, which is very configurable, you would have the Pomodoro timer right here in your interface. So instead of going to a website like you would usually do, I can show you really quick. This is a famous site that, you know, you can just start and then it, you know, there's a countdown, and if you enable like browser notifications, you'll get a notification for your break, and you know, this will go on and on. So this is quite handy for people that use it. Let's see if, you know, this will work. Also, I'm just touching my laptop right now. It's quite hot. The unified memory is cooking on my MacBook. Probably the biggest model I've run, the Qwen 3.8, 27 billion parameters. I believe it's still quantized. Yeah, definitely is. So yeah, the nice thing here is that you can see the thinking traces, and you know, take it lightly when I say thinking, you know, I don't mean like a real human thinking, but these extra tokens that are spent before, you know, you get an answer, kind of this chain of thought reasoning. Again, same with reasoning. I know a lot of people get mad when they hear like thinking and reasoning. Here, it's nice that you can at least see this. A lot of closed source harnesses are optimized for their own frontier models, like Claude Harness is very optimized for the Anthropic models. The Codex Harness is very optimized for the OpenAI models. And they also sometimes block the reasoning traces because they're also scared that, you know, they're at the frontier and other companies could train their own models using, you know, the reasoning traces that their frontier models emit or give out. So here everything is more transparent. Obviously, it's much weaker. I'm using an open source model that's probably like 10 times smaller, maybe even more than their frontier models. Still, it's nice that you can see everything, even the scales, the thinking traces, the tool calls. I remember even back in the day, I was using Anthropic, and I remember I had a shareable link that also used a few tool calls. I wanted to show a chat to someone that, you know, showed a few tool calls that was executing some SQL against a database using an MCP tool. I remember one day I could open the toggle, and another day it would just say, you know, something was called and I couldn't open it. So I guess this is the problem with closed source harnesses. You never know what they will disable or enable, or maybe even modify in the background, or what the system prompt actually is. So yeah, this is the core benefit of these open source harnesses. Everything is configurable. You can see everything. It's much more transparent. But yeah, let's see. Now it's been cooking for like 13 minutes. You can see here it's running into some errors. And if you see this Cordis, by the way, in the name, this is simply their framework that DeepSeek created, that they built to essentially create this DeepSeek harness. So yeah, it's been like 13 minutes. I can see after errors, it's thinking, you know, what the problems could be and so on. Still running into a lot of them. So I'm actually not super hopeful, or I don't know if it will manage. Maybe I should have given it an easier task, but I think this is totally fair. We're using, you know, this Qwen 3.827 billion parameter model is, you know, deemed to be quite good. I think this is a fair task. It's not something super complex. Maybe because of the quantization, you know, it loses some of that accuracy or how good the model is. But yeah, let's see. I'm actually still quite hopeful that it can manage. Maybe it will take longer, burn more tokens, but at least no money is spent. So yeah, while this runs, we've already been a little bit over this, that you can, you know, add different providers. You have so many different model providers. And for example, Olama, I just set up a custom provider. You know, this is all quite easy. If you have, for example, a model running somewhere in your cluster, or maybe even some open source model that you have only for yourself, running on a separate server or a computer, etc. And yeah, the same thing with web search we've seen. So this is quite nice, of course. So for example, right, just for context, in Cloud Code or Codex, you don't know what they use for sure. It's believed that, you know, Bing powers some of Codex's, you know, web searches, and Anthropic uses, I believe, Brave for their government solutions. At least I think they disclosed that, but you know, you can't be 100% certain when you're using it in your own personal subscription or with the API key what is happening. So this gives you a little bit more control. For example, if you wanted to use like Tavily, right, this is also a popular web search API and considered to be, you know, one of the best out there. So if you wanted to use that, you can easily use that as a plugin. So I believe this will be quite popular with people who want a lot of flexibility, but I do see that this can be also quite overwhelming, and especially for people who are potentially scared of the terminal or are not as tech savvy. But I believe in this day and age, everybody is trying to become more tech savvy anyway. So anyways, I think it's a trade-off, right? You sacrifice flexibility and, you know, building your own thing for kind of like a quick win and maybe a more opinionated harness like Cloud Code or OpenAI Codex. So yeah, in the end of the day, everything, you know, is about options and trade-offs. So this is a tool at the end of the day. So you have to know when to use a certain tool for a certain task. To conclude, I believe that here you have much more flexibility, and especially for like research purposes, I believe this will also be quite nice because you can configure it, you know, very deeply, and for reproducibility, this is also very, very nice. Yeah, let's go back to our Pomodoro timer plugin. So it's been 18 minutes. My computer is almost flying away. It's already quite hot. You know, the benefit is I'm not paying any cloud PI costs here, right? But, you know, as you can see, there's the downside that probably more mistakes are being done simply because the model is a bit smaller. Maybe also the context window is not big enough. We're still a bit hopeful. While it's still cooking, we can go back to this trajectory tab. So you can see here very nicely, you know, what was the initial system prompt. You can see this was my input. You can view it, you know, even as raw text or as JSON. You can see some of the runtime context that they inject, like system reminders, that they have this Cordis plugin development. Probably these are injected based on what mode you're using, perhaps also what skills it used. So this is really, really nice. So yeah, this is very visually appealing. You can, you know, select even snippets of the trajectory and kind of dig deeper into what went wrong. So this is honestly like a gold mine for like debugging and sort of evaluating where things failed at which point. But yeah, let's go back to the chat. So it's been 20 minutes, still working hard. So yeah, to conclude whether, this works out or not, the idea is if you try to kind of reskin code or codex like this, the answer is you can't. It's kind of sealed shut. And so this is more of like a Lego set, a less finished product, and you build the thing you actually want, that you want to work with. So you can configure here your interface as you like. A lot of things are configurable, but this already looks quite promising. And so the answer is, does this replace things like Claude Code or Codex? Probably. If you just want a quick solution, this is probably not the answer. You have much more configuration to go through. Same with like other open source harnesses like Pi, if you've heard of it. But yeah, if you haven't heard of the Pi coding agent, this is also a very minimalistic one that you can try out. Okay, so now we're hitting 30 minutes and still I'm a bit hopeful, but yeah, let's see. Also, one thing is that, just because I'm using open source models doesn't mean that you have to. So you can use the frontier models with this more configurable harness where everything is a plugin. Just because, this might not work doesn't mean that it's the harness. It could be the model itself, but that's exactly what they're preaching, that you can configure the tools, the skills, the models themselves, even the interface as much as you would like. And so this is the real power, right? But actually it was more of a test for me to, test kind of the leading open source models and see if they can do it. So that's why I'm really excited to see if this would work or not. Yeah, I see it's going into more errors. So I believe I remember using other open source models, especially like the 4 billion models. Sometimes if you don't configure the context to be, bigger than like 32,000 or something, then a lot of the times they're forgetting what even happened like 2 minutes ago, right? So this could be the problem, but yeah, anyways, let's give it time. This is not efficient or ideal or optimal in any sense, but kind of treating it as a normal user who probably wouldn't configure a lot as well, what their first impressions would be. Also, one thing I forgot to mention, when I started up Olama, this is how I could call it, and set up the custom provider, and we cloned the whole DeepSeek Harness repo and, built it and launched it. But in Olama, I just realized you have these launch commands for the different agents and harnesses, and I see that they already added DeepSeek's open source agent harness. So you could run this and I believe add a flag like -- model, and then, Qwen 3.8. And then with one command, you can launch this instead of, cloning, building it, opening the web app, and so on. So I kind of showed you the harder way, but here's the easier way. The benefit of the harder way is that you download it or like you run it from source. And so, every single commit you can get that they might not even release directly as a new package version, you can already test. So especially when it's in preview, I think it's nice that you can already test things out, even though it might break more, but at least you can, kind of dabble your fingers in this latest products from DeepSeek. Okay, so after 40 minutes, it says that it has everything it needs. Sounds exciting. Let's see if this will actually work. Okay, so we're hitting 50 minutes, and honestly, what surprised me is, like, if you look at the benchmarks of how they promoted Qwen 3.8 was basically like a better version of Opus 4.6 Max, which is kind of wild, right? Like, this Opus model is probably so much bigger in terms of parameters and still beat it in like almost everything they list here. Granted, some things Opus doesn't even have scores for, like visual web development, but still compared to the previous Qwen models, it still looks, much better. And I guess here what would be relevant for our task, probably visual web development actually the most. And yeah, I'm actually not sure what other models score here, but yeah, this just goes to show that, yeah, benchmarks might look amazing, but I mean, if it takes 50 minutes just to kind of draw something on an interface, right? I mean, at least that's how you look at it from the high level perspective. Of course, there's so many nuances here, right? Like, browsers are quite complex, and which APIs do you use, state here is quite important and stuff like that. So these are nuances that maybe the average person will ignore, but obviously software engineer has to do a deep dive and compare trade-offs and things of that nature. So yeah, anyways, it's quite interesting. Obviously, from a high level perspective, it's like, yeah, it's quite disappointing. It's almost an hour and we still don't have essentially a timer. Of course, as I mentioned, there are more nuances to it, but you would think with everybody saying coding is solved, think people who don't like open source models will probably say, yeah, but the frontier models could have done this super easily. But yeah, in my opinion, still, fundamentally, the same technology. So, maybe the frontier models would do okay in this, even do it faster and stuff like that. But ultimately, they will still run into issues if you give them a similarly hard problem, for their scale, maybe for their context window, for their parameter model size. In the end, they're still constrained by the same things. Now that I'm thinking about it, every time it queried, it worked, but then every time it actually wanted to write something, perhaps that's when it failed. I'm not sure. I would have to go through the, traces in detail. One very naive thing is here, just for time's sakes for the video, could it be that it can write in the workspace, but perhaps it needs more access? Okay, I'm sacrificing for you guys. Better like and subscribe. My laptop could just be all broken after this. So yeah, I'm not sure if that was the problem. I guess if we still see these tool call errors, it's probably just the arguments that it's probably messing up. But yeah, just in case, because I guess it has to write in some files and some configuration files to kind of edit this window. And so probably upon refreshing, the Pomodoro timer should appear. But yeah, let's see. Probably not needed, but yeah, just to skew things in its favor. Okay, we're approaching 1 hour. Let me see if it was... Maybe the output tokens should have been a bit higher. I think if you are customizing and configuring things so much and then claiming, something works, it's kind of like being so specific that you're almost programming again, right? If you think about it, programming languages, all they are is kind of very specific way of writing things. So the computer does what you ask it to. And the big claim with LLMs is that, hey, it's easier, just write natural language queries. Anybody can do this. Coding is a solved problem. But then it feels like going from this like super specific programming language to this like very high level abstract, essentially English or whatever language you use to code. And then we're configuring, making it more specific. And, it's almost like we're going down back to, this specific programming language that we wanted to avoid in the first place, because syntax you have to learn, steep learning curve, software fundamentals, things of that nature. So actually, funnily enough, during this 1 hour of waiting, I've been having some kind of, not like eureka moments, but some kind of realizations that anyways you hear about in the news, other people talking about. But I think when you use something and then see results for yourself, or maybe the lack thereof, that's when you start having, your own opinion and also seeing what works for you. Because ultimately, if it works for other people for their use cases, okay, great. What if it's something that you want to do, that you use, and it doesn't work, right? So it might be the case that it's less effective for you, right? So yeah, anyways. Okay, so it's been 1 hour. I'm actually quite impressed that it ran for so long and still didn't give up. Obviously it would be nice, like if I find the root cause, that it would stop and ask me, hey, can you perhaps give me access to this? Or could you, at least stop early, cut the losses short, and, point in the better direction. Instead, it's trying to do everything on its own, right? We saw in the beginning, it even evaluated trade-offs. Should I use the browser notification API or host RPC and so on and so forth? So it's also a trade-off, right? Do you want the model to do everything for you, potentially run into a lot of errors, loops, waste tokens? Or do you want to guide it more, but at the cost of, you having to be physically there and approve and manually review? So yeah, this is also something to think about. Let me know what you guys, think about all these questions. There's no right or wrong. It's more about trade-offs, your own use cases, your expertise with these systems. But yeah, let's see. I mean, this would be, a use case where maybe you say, these 2 sentences that I said in the beginning, then you go for like an hour, or in this case, maybe even longer, right? Maybe go shower, have lunch, do grocery shopping, come back, and then see if it works out. I think the danger is that, you might see it, there in the end or not. And that's the only thing you can kind of judge it on at a high level. And at a deeper level, you have to go through every trace, tool call, see where things failed, if things became repetitive or everything is new, and you have to actually look through it. So I also understand this concept of, it's getting easier to pump out lines of code, PRs. And some people are even saying, the bottleneck is now like the PR reviews. But honestly, if you look at it, it's kind of like we're delegating, instead of the author who's creating something, thinking about the design, about how to execute it, kind of writing code that they know will be easily reviewed. So being sort of more empathetic in the sense that, okay, I have to do a really good job, so I know I need to get reviewed. And so the reviewer will have an easier time and everything will go faster. So instead of that time spent in the beginning from the author, we're kind of delegating it to the reviewer. And I don't know if that's good at all, to be honest, because in a sense, the reviewer kind of has to do your job, go through, all this potential slop or misdirection of what you wanted to do, correct you, right? So they might have as well just done it themselves, or you would have done it, in a better way from the beginning. It's kind of like delegating the effort downstream, to a later process. And so I'm not sure how this will be long term, but yeah, just from initial thoughts, I mean, that doesn't sound optimal, and actually, quite worse if you ask me. So yeah, a lot of people bring out like, Anthropics, SLA, service level agreements of essentially, what percentage of the time are they up and stuff like that. Usually have these like 7 nines or like 9 nines, like 99.999 whatever percent. They're not even hitting like 2 or 3, and same with like Copilot and also other software. And I wonder if that's the case. I mean, it sounds plausible, right? That because of all this kind of like vibe coding, everybody's like delegating, the actual effort to like the reviewers. The reviewers historically just don't have time, whether it's in the industry, people usually have their job, and reviewing is also part of their job. But, I've worked in the industry, and a lot of the times it's kind of like, people sometimes do it over hours, or, managers underestimate how long it takes, so they don't give enough time for that. And it's the same thing in academia, reviewing papers, it's also unpaid work, unglamorous, takes a lot of time. It's underestimated. And so now this like 1 hour of building this Pomodoro timer in the DeepSeek Harness here really made me think. So I'd like to think, even if this doesn't work, at least it made me think a lot about different things. And I hope it did for you as well. At the end of the day, nobody's an expert. We're all trying to, figure this out. Unless you're like the top 1% of AI and tech researchers, engineers, leaders, etc. So yeah, drop a like and subscribe if you haven't. Let me know what else you would like to see. I try to answer every single comment, no matter what, if it's a very simple question, more complex, even about just life in general, let's talk about it. Happy to discuss. But yeah, we're approaching 70 minutes now, and still nothing really happened. Okay, it says now let me write the final code. I will keep it readable. Okay, it's gonna write the CSS. Okay, it's thinking about the widget positions. Okay, it switched from top 20, right 20 to bottom 20 pixels, right 20 pixels. Love how these models are always like, actually, or like, let me do this. Oh, but then drag converts to, they're always like in this internal battle themselves. Okay, it wrote a lot of like code. Now it's again questioning itself, double checking some things. Feels like it maybe has a built-in code review, and maybe one of the prompts to self-evaluate itself, which I think it's better to like spawn a separate agent with fresh context, but I don't know if I can afford this. Maybe that's why it hasn't done it in terms of like resources on my laptop. it keeps going into a loop of like questioning itself, so I'm not sure if this will end. I mean, it has to at some point, right? But I'm just gonna leave it. I was tempted to stop it after an hour, but I said, you know what, maybe it works out, just takes a lot of time and it's very inefficient. But I mean, like, all these considerations, couldn't you have done them like earlier? But I mean, like, to be fair, sometimes you think of something and then until you test it out, you figure out more things, but still feels very inefficient, to be honest. Honestly, I don't want to admit how much time I've spent on this. I came back after a while. You can see it ran for more than 2 hours. And when I came back, I think there was a timeout. My display went off. I forgot to keep it on. So I thought I will try different models. And my idea was to use Google Studio, for example, because I know there you can create a project and there's a free tier that used to be quite generous. And now it wasn't even enough for Flash. So I actually tried, first Gemini 2.0 Flash. I wanted to use something really cheap, but this is no longer available. And then you can see here I used 3.6 Flash, which is more recent. Did a bunch of like grepping and reading, and then it couldn't even continue to write something and it already exceeded the quota, so that was unfortunate. And so my other option was OpenRouter. I figured there are a few models that also kind of have this free tier access where you have like a daily free limit. And so I used NVIDIA's Nemotron 3 Nano 30 billion. Kept saying that it's done, even though it wasn't. As you can see, I would tell it I don't see it in the interface. I know you see it now, but it was another model. And it kept saying it's done and running into errors. And yeah, I refreshed it and then I realized, okay, I have to build it again. I did build it, so it's not in like the static HTML, but still didn't work. So I tried Gemini, OpenRouter, arguably not like frontier models, right? Maybe 3.6 Flash is like almost there, right? And then here I wanted to try it with GPT-5. I think I was using an invalid key. And then when I got a valid key, this was much faster. I think it was like 20 seconds. It kept saying that, okay, it's done. But it built it actually into the static HTML page. And so upon a new build or a refresh, it wasn't there. And so ultimately what I did was actually go to my Cloud Code subscription. As you can see, it's actually still like testing it here, because I actually, as soon as it said that it was ready, it just had to run like the tests. I already built it, and now I think it's hung up because the port 3080 is already taken. So Opus 5 got the job done. But I mean, that's not to say that Codex wouldn't have been able to. Perhaps it's also the harness of DeepSeek here. You know, I saw during some runs, they were confused by, like, the models would argue, why is this context being injected? And, you know, so maybe out of the box, you still have to configure quite a bit. But still, you know, it looks powerful. It's still in preview, as mentioned. It is quite exciting. And yeah, let's actually test if Claude, I mean, it looks like it got the job done, but let's see if it actually works. So you can start it, you can see there's a time elapsed, and I'm not gonna wait now another 25 minutes, but, you know, I mean, this is kind of like a rather simple web dev task, you know. Yeah, I guess you can activate short breaks and then it will run for 5 minutes, so you can see this is filling up faster. So anyways, this is nice, like you can customize this interface. This is just one example. I've seen people also bring, like, I think it's in Google Colab or in VS Code, or like plugins so that you have like animals running around. You can definitely do such things, and, you know, you can be creative. And the whole idea is that this is like very customizable, right? So yeah, anyways, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it brought some value. And yeah, like and subscribe. It helps out a ton. And let me know what you would like to see in the future.